Hello and welcome to another episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin.
And I'm Ginny Dietrich.
And Ginny, I'm canceling you. You're canceled. And we'll talk about why after this. And just to be clear, we're not talking about cancel culture today. We're talking about cancellation culture.
Cancellation culture. Yes. I'm trying to open the link.
Oh, boy.
There we go.
We're off to a rockin' start today already.
So in the SpinSucks community, there's been a couple of conversations about this over the last couple of weeks about contracts and cancellation. And the first question that came up probably about a month ago was, I know some larger agencies make clients sign agreements with 6 or 12-month cancellation clauses. For our agency, we use a 60-day clause as a standard notice. So number one, how do other agencies, contractors address cancellation notices? What do you do if a client breaks the agreement early, demands to cancel immediately, doesn't pay? And then the conversation evolved to how big of a problem is it that freelancers, contractors, agencies are not getting paid by unethical clients? So you have the cancellation clause, you have the clients who are not paying, you have the clients who are disputing, you have the clients who are canceling early, you have all of these pieces into it, which we thought would be a good conversation for today's episode.
It's a good but painful conversation for so many reasons. And obviously it's painful for agency owners when they are dealing with clients who cancel, because that's lost revenue. Nobody likes that.
No. And it's, as you know, cash is king. And when you're relying on cash to, pay your bills, pay your employees, pay yourself, it's kind of a big deal when you don't get paid.
But do you need cash anymore? Can't we just use this magic Bitcoin and we just have our computers mine money for? We don't really need to get paid by clients. We just print our own money now. That doesn't work that way.
Yeah, the tree in the backyard that's growing money as well. That one.
Well, the trees in my backyard are shedding leaves right now. So.
As are mine. Everywhere.
Yes, all over the place. But it is what it is. So, I mean, look, there's a whole bunch of things we can dig into here with this. The whole idea of cancellation and how you cancel a client contract or how your client cancels it. It's something that we've addressed a little bit previously. I think we had an episode where we talked about contracts a couple of years ago and some of the provisions in that. I think we've discussed on air before that I generally don't like long cancellation clauses, and I'm generally of the mindset that if a client's unhappy, I want to find a way to facilitate their exit in a way that's fair to both sides, because keeping an unhappy client around doesn't really help. Sure. I know you're a little more hardcore about cancellation policies than I am. So, for once we'll have a little bit of a difference of opinion here, which is, healthy. But you really need to think about what your philosophical approach is first and how you want to go about it, whether you're more like, let's make sure that we don't get cheated, but let's let them go. Or your approach, which is, damn it, you promised me money, I'm taking it.
It's a little. All right, it was a little bit like that. I'm not gonna lie, and I will spend money to make a point with clients that try to stiff me.
Yes, I think we have mentioned that on air before, that you did once pursue a client, even though it cost you more than you collected, just because
the point is that he was gaslighting me, and he thought he could pull one over on me. And just because I'm a pretty little girl does not mean I will not come after you. And as my sister would say, go all Omaha on them. So I went all Omaha on him.
Why Omaha?
Yes. When she was in high school, she lived in Omaha, and I was in college, in a very bad part of town. And they would, when they were doing bad things, they would say they were going all Omaha on people. It's not actually good, but today, as adults, we say that we're going to go all Omaha on somebody when it's
okay.
We're going to beat them up.
I hadn't heard that one before, and I don't really think of as a New Englander. I don't really say Omaha and think, mean.
Yeah, she lived in a pretty
Omahanians or whatever they are.
It was a pretty bad part of town. So.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So yes, I will.
Yes. Well, I mean,
I
you
will
shouldn't
spend my
allow
money
people to take
to-
it. Yeah.
Yeah. But I've also found a couple of things, and certainly as the agency has evolved and progressed and grown and matured, and as I've grown and matured as well, I've figured out a couple of things. And one is that for the most part, agency retainer relationships are built for the client to always be saying, when should we get out of this? When will we get out of this? And part of that's how the contracts are built. Like, you have a 60-day cancellation clause. The client's always thinking, okay, are we going to cancel this in 60 days? And they're constantly thinking that, even if it's not consciously, it's subconscious. So we really try to look at it and say, okay, how can we affect this client's business and their growth, but have multi-year relationships? Because I don't want to be in a position where the client's always thinking, shoot, I don't know if this is working right now. So 60 days, maybe we should give them notice now so that 60 days from now we can start to, like, I don't appreciate that kind of relationship. So we look at things a little bit differently.
Well, see, that's why I personally like 30 days. So I've always done 30-day outs for in part that reason, because you don't really have to plan ahead, right? 30 days is short enough that it makes them feel like if this goes south, I can always get out of it. And so for me, I've found that tends to lead to a stickier relationship, right? Because it's sort of like an employee, right? I mean, I know I'm not a fan of signing employment contracts with employees that say, okay, this is a 1 year or 2 year contract,
right.
Which is not all that common here. It's more common in other parts of the world. But I would prefer just to have an employee, and we both know that, we want this relationship to work. But if it doesn't, either one of us can walk away. And I like my relationships with clients to be similar to that, because I think it should always be working. But I do understand the philosophy that you want to have more runway than that.
Yeah. And I will say that, I mean, our letters of agreement that we revised probably 5 years ago have a 90-day cancellation clause. And almost everybody negotiates that down, but it gives them the feeling that they can negotiate something. So,
right.
Okay. So I'm okay with that. But the other thing that we do with that cancellation clause is we say this letter of agreement, first of all, you can't cancel within the first 90 days because that's not enough time. And then you have the cancellation clause. So essentially you have to work with us for 6 months is the agreement. But we also say the letter of agreement covers the entirety of our relationship. We may add new statements of work to it, or we may, go up and down in fees and those kinds of things. But the letter of agreement covers the whole relationship. And we have found that is significantly easier on continuing relationships, because before that happened, we would have to go to clients about now in October and say, what do you want to do for next year? How are we? And that sucked, because it gave the client an out. So we don't do that anymore. Like, you have a 60 or 90-day cancellation clause. You've signed an agreement, and we're going to go and do the work as long as we possibly can. And that works. It tends to work. People pay their bills. Everybody's happy. We're good.
Yeah, and that is uniformly what I recommend to my clients as well, that you have, whether it's a letter of agreement or a master services agreement or some sort of core document that governs the relationship, and then you just hang individual statements of work off of that.
Yep.
So that you have that flexibility. And you don't, and it's particularly useful when you deal with larger clients who may have legal departments or procurement departments or those kinds of things, because it's a lot easier to vet a 1 or 2 page statement of work than it is to do a whole new agreement. Because even if the language is exactly the same as it is the year before, I can guarantee you if they pass it by their lawyer, the lawyer is going to find new things, because lawyers look for things.
That's
just
what they're
because
supposed to do.
they can. And they change their ideas. My own business lawyer has over the years changed his philosophy about certain clauses and what he likes to see. And so I will give him a document that he has personally written and he will edit it. And I'll be like, hey, why are you doing that? You wrote this. Like, focus on the part that the client wants changed, not the part that you wrote and they've already agreed to. Like, please.
Stop it.
You know, stop it. And procurement's the same way. They look at every little detail, and they're always looking to shave a little here, do a little of this and that. So don't give them the excuse to do it. And so I think, we are certainly in alignment on that piece of it. And I do think, having some sort of a minimum commitment is valuable as well, particularly if the work that you're doing requires ramp up time, which most agency client engagements do. And it gives you that opportunity to make sure that you're never going to be out money, right? So if you know that the first 2 or 3 months are much more intense, but you don't want to price it differently, and you're just eating it as part of your overall retainer, which I think is fine, have a minimum to make sure that you've at least covered that investment.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, and I think that for the most part, those kinds of things allow clients to understand that you're an actual business, that you are handling things professionally, that you're doing things as a business owner and as a business should. And it makes things easier for them to understand that, you're not you're not the homeless guy that I saw sleeping in our alley this morning that is, selling streetwise to make a buck. This is a real business. We have employees. We have, even if you're your only employee, you have to do these kinds of things to protect yourself and your business. And I personally believe that the longer that a client has to cancel the contract, the easier it is for you as a business owner to project cash flow, to predict what you're going to have to do, to be able to replace that business, all those kinds of things. And it protects you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is important. And I think that particularly for small agencies, it is important to convey to your clients that we're running this like a real business. And so we're not just, sort of seat of the pants, we'll just do an email and be done with it. We're using an actual agreement that's got actual terms that we're going to negotiate if we have to. And the other thing to keep in mind is that these contracts and cancellation clauses, they're there for when things go wrong, right? They're there for when the client is, clients don't cancel if they feel like they're getting more bang for their buck than they would if they did something else, right? It would be insanity for them to say, yeah, this is working really well. We're getting a great return on investment. We're canceling anyway. Right.
Right.
That 99.9% of the time, that's not why someone cancels, right? It's usually because they are dissatisfied in some fashion. And, one of the discussions that we had in the Spin Sucks community was, in my view, most cancellations are not the result of one party or the other. It's not that the client just doesn't understand what you're doing, and it's not that you did a terrible job. It's usually some combination of the two. I know that some on the client side chimed in otherwise and basically said it's always the agency's fault and we should be able to do whatever we want. I respectfully disagree with that perspective. Most times I see a failure in the relationship, there's blame to go around. And so you as the agency shouldn't believe that you are guilt-free when the relationship fails, and the client shouldn't feel that way either.
I will say, as you're talking about this, I will say that there have been a couple of times in the life of my agency that I have not held clients to the cancellation clause. The first time was during the Great Recession, and the second time was during the shutdown last year. And I will say that because, certainly getting a call from every single client the first week of April last year sucked big time, and it got to the point where I was like, I don't want to have this call, do I? Every time I answered the phone, and the client would laugh and say, nope. And I'd be like, all right, well, I'm not going to hold you to the cancellation clause. And every single one of them came back because of that. Because of that. Would it have been easier from a cash flow perspective, all those kinds of things, to have that income for 60 days? Sure. But those clients wouldn't have come back. So I think you have to think about longer term implications from that perspective as well.
Right. And that's the thing. You always need to, just because you have a policy or a legal agreement in place doesn't mean that that's the only answer. It's a starting point to figure out the solution. And so, you need to use your judgment, whether it's because there's some, large external event that has gone on. Maybe it's just to that business. Maybe they lost their biggest client and they're like, look, we our cash is tight. We got to take a break. You have to keep those things in mind and use good judgment. particularly because you don't want to win the battle and lose the war.
Right.
You may be able to capture your 90-day cancellation payment, but you may never see them again. And so would you rather, as you did, eat that cancellation cost effectively and get them back later and get more than 90 days of more work from them, or not? And so you just use good judgment here. Don't just sit there and say, by God, we have a 90-day cancellation policy and you will pay it.
I mean, there are certainly cases for that, for sure.
There are. I mean, there are certainly cases where you need to take a hard line, whether that's on, non-payment and suspending work for a client or forcing them to pay out the full term of their contract or all those kinds of things. But use some thoughtful judgment in the process.
So I think there's another angle to this, which was the second part of the conversation, and that is non-payment by clients, which I think is one issue, and then disputes is another issue. So we can discuss them both. I have opinions on both of them.
Well, I mean, neither you nor I have a shortage of opinions on pretty much anything, which is good when you're a podcast host because you kind of got to fill airtime. So non-payment. I dealt with non-payment a fair bit when I was running a software as a service company. I can't tell you that I had a lot of non-payment issues as an agency, in the various agencies that I ran. I certainly had them. I'm not saying that there were never any issues. Usually it was more in the terms of slow payment rather than non-payment or a true, what I would call payment dispute, where someone says, I'm not paying this because I didn't get what I paid for, right? I mean, I can think of literally only a single case in my agency career as an owner where that happened. And it was, like everything else, it was like I said earlier, it was a little their fault, a little my fault. At the end of the day, I think I was in the right, but it is what it is. You water under the bridge. So if you're having a lot of them, then you need to hit the pause button and say, why is this such an issue for me? Why is this not a once in a blue moon kind of thing? And is it that the expectations aren't being set correctly? Is it a communications issue? There's something else going on if this is more than a very rare issue for your agency. Yeah,
or could be ignoring the red flags.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
I remember the only time that we have had payment disputed, and knock on wood, is it was a friend of mine, and he owned a business that he sold. And then it was during the time that Groupon was becoming a big deal, and he wanted to create a Groupon competitor. And so he took his money from the sale of his business, and he took his chief operating officer with him, and they started this business. And he called me and he was like, we're doing this. We'd like to hire you. And I was like, great. The very first meeting, he made his COO cry in front of us because he was being so rude. And then as we were walking out, he said to us, don't F this up. But he used the actual word. And I remember standing outside of their building on Wacker Drive, downtown Chicago, with my team. And we all just looked at each other like, what just happened? That was terrible. And right then I should have called him and said, listen, it's going to ruin our friendship. We shouldn't do this. And I didn't, because I didn't have the confidence to look at the red flags. And he owed us $120,000 and didn't pay us ever. He never paid us.
Yep. I
had to sue him, and I never got that money ever. So I take the blame from the perspective of I knew from the moment of that first meeting that we shouldn't have done that business, and I ignored that. So I think there are those kinds of things you have to pay attention to too, and trust your gut. You have to trust your gut.
Yep. And when I said earlier that when an agency client relationship fails, there's fault on both sides, that red flag thing is a big piece of it, right?
Yep.
Or the other problem is that you agree to do work that you either know is not a good fit for the client or not a good fit for you. Like you've taken on work just because it's available to you. And, I'm not really great at graphic stuff, but, sure, we'll do some design work as part of this. I mean, it usually comes about because you've agreed to something at the beginning of that relationship that you never should have, whether it's the client altogether or the work that you're doing or something.
Yep.
And that is a huge cause of the problem.
Yeah, for sure. So I would say, and we've had episodes about this, but watch for red flags. Trust your gut. I have a business coach who will say to me, obey your gut because it's always right. Trust your instinct. You know what you're doing, and don't it's far easier and far less expensive to walk away in the beginning when you see the red flags than to pursue it and hurt your reputation.
Right. And the other thing I will say when it comes to payment disputes, don't allow non-payments to build up.
Right.
Because this is the problem that I've seen when I've gone in to work with other agencies where they've got, an existing client, not necessarily one that's even canceled at this point, but they've got a pile of unpaid invoices. The larger that pile gets, the staler that debt gets, the less likely you are to ever see it.
Yep.
And so then when you get to a cancellation stage, now you've got a problem, because now you've got all of that unpaid stuff. Plus, if they haven't paid the last 2 or 3 months, the likelihood of them paying the next 2 or 3 months after they've told you they're canceling is infinitesimally small.
Yep.
And so that then has turned what could have been a small payment dispute if you had nipped it in the bud when they first became a non-payer, has now become this big thing that you need to figure out how to solve.
Yeah. And so one of the things that we started doing is we bill in advance. So we're recording this at the end of September. So at the beginning of October, we'll bill for October, and people have to pay for that. We accept credit cards. I don't care. Like, I know lots of agency owners are like, oh, I don't want to incur that fee. Like, I think that's stupid. Like,
It's horribly stupid.
I'd rather have the cash.
Yes.
and know I'm going to get the cash on a recurring basis. So we accept credit cards. And if they want to put $40,000 or $50,000 a month on it, so be it. And
Absolutely.
We accept wire transfers. We only have one client who pays us by check. That's it. Everybody else does a wire or pays by credit card. And
a paper check still?
Yeah.
Really?
He delivers it in person.
Oh, okay. All right. So very, very old school then.
He's 80.
Okay.
Yeah, he's awesome. He's one of my favorites. But yeah, he's the only one, and he's the only one I will allow that. But that way we know we're going to get paid, and we don't have accounts receivable sitting on our books ever.
Right. Yeah. And that is the best way to stay out of financial trouble as an agency, because otherwise you're turning into a bank for your clients. You are not a bank.
You're not a bank.
It is not your expertise.
Nope.
You probably don't have the pile of cash that you're sitting on to sustain that anyway. So do not turn into a bank. No. Absolutely bill in advance. If you're doing project work, bill at least 50% up front.
Yep.
Don't
pay their expenses. If they have big expenses like media buys or whatever, they have to pay for that kind of stuff. You are not the bank.
Yep. Absolutely. And if you do that, and if you stay on top of people, you'll be in much better shape. Now, some larger clients, if you're going to take their work, you probably are going to have to agree to longer terms. You still need to hold them to them, right? So you can't let it slide. And so that means, if you've agreed to 60-day payment terms on day 61, you got to be calling them up and saying, hey, where'd that money? Right. And you need to keep pushing.
Show me the money.
And at some point you have to be willing to call up and say, hey, we're suspending work.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we're just not. And in those cases, I always advise, keep doing the work behind the scenes for a little bit so you don't put yourself behind the 8 ball. Right. Just don't give them anything.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Hold back deliverables. Don't do meetings, but keep doing the behind the scene work so that when they do come current with their payment, which most of them end up doing pretty quickly when you end up suspending work, you're not all of a sudden saying you need to squeeze 5 days of work into one to get back on schedule.
So I would say at the beginning of the relationship is when all of this stuff needs to be outlined. It needs to be in your contract. You need to be very clear. You have to set expectations. And if you do that, people comply because it's a business relationship. They're excited to work with you. Just set the expectation and make sure that you're protecting yourself and your agency, and it'll be fine. It will be fine.
Yep. But absolutely do the postmortem too. When you had a cancellation, figure out why.
Sure.
And address that. Whether it's because you got the wrong client to begin with, you didn't communicate with them effectively. There's some lesson that you can take from every cancellation and apply to the future.
Absolutely.
So don't just sit there and say, oh, they never got it. It was their fault. It's not. Fault. Blame is shared.
Shared blame. Yes, indeed.
And with that will bring us to an end of this episode. I'm not going to blame you for the fact that
you're not canceling me.
I'm not. No, I'm uncanceling you now.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
Because I can't pay your terms. So It's easier just to stick with you. So
I don't know how I feel about that.
yeah, I don't care. On that note, I'm Chip Griffin.
And I'm Ginny Dietrich.
And it depends. Thank you for listening to the Agency Leadership Podcast. You can watch or listen to every episode by visiting agencyleadershippodcast.com. The Agency Leadership Podcast is distributed on the FIR Podcast Network. Just visit www.firpodcastnetwork.com. We welcome your feedback and suggestions and look forward to being back with you again next week.